From small towns to city streets, Mississippi is more than just a place. It's a collection of stories, experiences, and people who carry it with them every day. This is Growing Up in the SIP. I'm Carl Wilson. In each episode, we will explore what it really means to grow up, live, and build a life in Mississippi. Today's conversation is about what it means to grow up and build a life in Mississippi. I'm joined by Samuel Lovitt from Hattiesburg, a husband, a cat dad, and someone who grew up right here in the Pine Belt of Mississippi. In this episode, we're talking about his experiences growing up in Hattiesburg, how that shaped his life, and how his family's connection to the civil rights movement continues to influence him today. So thank you for being on my podcast today, Sam.
Yeah, of course.
So just to start off, can you describe Hattiesburg from someone who's never been here?
Yeah. Oh, man. Hattiesburg is a sleepy yet vibrant town that is kind of a between two worlds of like hipster community that's kind of growing and retirement community. A lot of people think of Hattiesburg as like a great place to raise a family and get a job. Especially in Mississippi because we're so close to different things. That's why they call us the hub city. If I had to describe it to somebody, I think I would probably say it's the biggest city in Mississippi, but the smallest town in the South,
I agree. I feel like Hattiesburg, to me, has felt like a second home, and I've only been here 2 years. So I would say that says a lot about Hattiesburg because it takes me a while to get adjusted to new things. So, What was your childhood like growing up in Hattiesburg?
My childhood was pretty good. I grew up in a suburban neighborhood pretty close to University of Southern Mississippi's campus. It wasn't like a fenced-in community. It was very much like open. You could drive by right there off University Heights and Heatherwood. I just remember people of, everybody basically lived in that neighborhood. We've got a lot of communities that are kind of like closed off and are a little bit more to themselves, like Canebrake or, Waterford or Innswood. But I just remember our neighborhood kind of just being open and right in the center of everything. And so growing up, I think in that area, you were just kind of exposed to the whole of Hattiesburg. I remember like riding my bikes around and just seeing a lot of the inner city and the inner neighborhood and just kind of feeling like we were kind of connected to everything. And it wasn't really till I kind of got out of high school that I realized like how much I really appreciated Hattiesburg and kind of the connection to so many things and the things around us.
Now that you mention it, it's kind of like different from where I grew up. I grew up like in a very rural area, so we were connected, but we were connected through different ways. Like we just couldn't walk down the street and go to our neighbor's house. Our neighbor's house was probably like a mile down the road. So we were spread out, but we were still connected as a community. And I feel like I get that same sense of community and belonging when I'm just around Hattiesburg and I'm going and I'm meeting these different people and they just like, they talk to me like they have known me forever. And I'm just like, wow, I really feel like I'm at home.
Yeah.
So you talked about your experience living here in Hattiesburg early on. So has it really changed from childhood to now with you being in adulthood?
Yeah, I think so much has changed in Hattiesburg. That's one thing that I've noticed is Hattiesburg is a very fast-changing city for Mississippi. I mean, if you look at the other cities, it just seems like Hattiesburg, its growth rate is just so fast. It's very rapidly growing. People are quickly moving here, and there's all sorts of different people that are starting to kind of flock to Hattiesburg. You see people from different states even willing to move to Hattiesburg now. The amount of tourism and things that we've really built, we've got attractions like USM has always been here and pulled people here, but now I think people have started to realize, this is really a place that I could see, building a family, and we've got access to a lot of great places to eat and great places to kind of just have leisure and have fun, get outside, and enjoy the fresh, clean air of Mississippi.
I definitely say Hattiesburg is like a big melting pot of different ethnicities and cultures, and it's really very interesting to see. Mm-hmm. So I just want to shift a little and talk about your family background. Before we came on the show, you mentioned that your grandfather was involved in civil rights work. Mm-hmm. So can you just tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'll try to keep it a little bit, but basically I kind of grew up with the knowledge that my mom was very young, but she tells me stories about her family and my grandfather, who was a forensic pathologist in Jackson, which he did a lot of different autopsies and worked with a lot of different homicide cases and cases of accidental deaths and things like that. And it's a very specific calling, right? My mom would tell stories about it's kind of difficult to see his lab, and there's often people's bodies and remains, and having to work with families very closely and kind of get some closure there. He happened to be on call one night where it was during the Freedom Summer movement and back in 1960s, where the civil rights movement was alive and well, especially in Mississippi. The tricky thing about that night that he probably didn't anticipate was that he was getting roped into a national historical event. And he was very much a man of integrity and honesty, and very much someone who believed in complete unbiased and objectivity. He was a man of science. And so he endeavored to do his job that night, which was to report how these men died. Little did he know this incident would be roped in by the FBI, and the reason for that would be obviously there's three individuals that he was responsible for were murdered, right? He was responsible for reporting on kind of what happened. And so with the police, the local Jackson police being in on it and sort of involved with the Ku Klux Klan and the Sovereignty Commission, and sort of there was a lot of corruption back then in Jackson, as Mississippi's got some history there. He got roped into having to testify against some of these local police. Well, it turned out to be a bit of an ordeal, as you might guess, and eventually it moved all the way to capital courts and things like that, federal courts and so on, and it got pretty dicey there for a bit, because he was very much a believer in all men are equal, right? Mm-hmm. At the time, that meant he would have different waiting rooms per segregation laws, but he did funny little things like didn't put AC in the white waiting rooms, whereas he would put AC in the black waiting rooms, because that was kind of his small way of, at that time, so many years ago, sort of evening the way things felt. I think he's very witty in his way of doing that without kind of causing a big ruckus. But he eventually came around to this case, and it got very, very tricky with his family. I remember my mom telling me she was on a bus to Chicago one night where she woke up. They were on the bus. They told her what kind of happened, and they had a cross burned in their yard and a brick thrown through their window with some pretty derogatory terms written on it. And I remember her just talking about that experience and being pretty terrified. And so she was on a bus with her mother and her other 6 siblings, and they just didn't really know what the outcome would be. And until the trial was kind of over and wrapped up, they had to stay in Chicago for a while. You know, I think there's a book called Murder on Rock Cut Road that has a lot of information, and there's a lot of PBS information out there to kind of look at Michael Schwerner, Chaney, and Goodman, and the three civil rights workers and things like that. But long story short, you know, that really influenced me. I think hearing those stories, even though I've never met my grandfather, because he passed away before I was born, those stories really influenced me to kind of carry on some of that legacy and seek out experiences with people who are different. Because that's, you know, what some of those experiences kind of led me to do is really realize, like, how pervasive racism can be, and it doesn't just affect people of color. It really takes away from our experience as human beings. And so those experiences motivated me to really see other parts of Hattiesburg, like, you know, getting involved with Mississippi Rising as a volunteer, and seeing some of the people that are in lower income communities and some of the more invisible people in the community. So, you know, even though I never met my grandfather, I was still able to carry on some of the ideals and some of his morals and values through a legacy, if that makes sense. Living in Hattiesburg, right?
So with that kind of history, that really connects the past to the present, if you really think about it, especially growing up in a place like Hattiesburg or Mississippi. So Mississippi has some very rich history. We have some dark history. We have some bright history. And
right.
We just have to learn how to embrace it all and just to respect the past and, you know, live in the present. So,
absolutely, yeah.
What is it like building a life in Hattiesburg as an adult?
Yeah. You know, as an adult, I think I appreciate it a lot more than I did as a teenager. You know, you get in that rebellious phase, and you kind of want to get out and experience new things. And I had always grown up in Hattiesburg, so it was kind of all I knew. You know, growing up in Hattiesburg as an adult, having lived other places, I really appreciate the convenience. Like, you really start to take in account of all the time that you spend running errands and doing things, and all of your time becomes very precious to you. And Hattiesburg really is good about giving you some of that time back, and you really make use of your time. Even simple things like running to the grocery store is, you know, maybe an hour tops endeavor, right? You know, that wouldn't be the case in bigger cities. So you know, there's that aspect of it, convenience, but also just the experience of Hattiesburg. I mean, we're such a collage of experiences. You know, you can go downtown and see murals and beautiful, rich history and old buildings, and get involved in some really rich activities that still involve people and not technology or just kind of a lack of social experience. You can really go downtown and just meet new people and get that whole experience. Or, you know, you can go to West Hattiesburg and still kind of have some of that different city experience where you can go out to eat in, you know, Indian Delight, or you can go to a Japanese cafe or Chitama's. You know, you can still experience some of those newer age events without having to sacrifice one or the other. So growing up as an adult in Hattiesburg is, it's a refreshing experience to where you really get to appreciate what you experienced in childhood a lot more.
Okay. Do you feel like living in Mississippi has shaped who you are as an adult?
Wow, yes. In so many ways. I feel humbled to be from Mississippi. I feel like you know, and you may have experienced some of this, like when you go outside of Mississippi, you feel almost like you're going to be judged, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think people really underestimate what goes on inside of Mississippi, especially, you know, in modern times. Like, we really are judged based on our history rather than, you know, where we're going or where we are. You know, I think that I think that it's probably influenced me in that I really want to do well, and I want to take care of my home here, and I want to influence people. One thing I've been asked in the kind of like early days of my career now, where I have the opportunity to move or branch out or try other places and things, I've been asked, are you going to do that, right? And one thing I've considered and have to consider is that I may do that, and a lot of people do leave Mississippi, but that doesn't really change things. And that ideal that Mississippi is never going to change doesn't really actually help anyone. And so I kind of think about how Mississippi's influenced me is that it's made me realize that if you want to change something, if you want to change anything that requires change, you really have to start at home. And you have to look at the good and the bad, like you said, and acknowledge it in order to move on and really make a change. And so I think it's influenced the way that I see things in a lot of different areas, but also just I really put a high value on, changing my home and appreciating what we've got here.
You really put into words how I really feel about Mississippi. So yeah. I'm glad that you was able to say that. And now I really, in words, I know how I feel about Mississippi.
Yeah.
So if someone was thinking about building a life in Mississippi, what would you tell them?
Gosh, I would say, seek out experience. Don't wait for experience to come to you. Although Mississippi, that may happen. And I think about a place like New Orleans, having lived there for a little bit. The experience kind of comes to you, right? In New Orleans, it's a little different. Like, it's rich everywhere you go, and you could just walk around and adventure. In Mississippi, you got to be a little creative. So if you're going to live here, I would say seek out experience, connect with the people, and really try to look for the experiences that have like shaped people, and try to appreciate those. I would also say, if you're trying to move from Mississippi from, up north or out west, there's going to be some notable differences. And I would say to find a lot of the good in the good people within the community and some of the rich, good parts of history, and immerse yourself in a lot of what we have to offer. And we've got a lot of good food. I would recommend trying some home cooking too.
Yeah, we definitely have some great soul food. But I would like to thank you for coming on and talking to me today and just talking about our great state of Mississippi. Thank you for listening to Growing Up in SIP. I'm Carl Wilson. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to follow the podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts, and share it with someone who has their own Mississippi story to tell. Until next time, remember, every story has a place, and every place has a story.